I think one reason that narrative poetry drew me was that the poets I responded to when I was young, beginning with Robert Frost, were narrative poets, and also probably because I'm a fiction writer as well as a poet. I like narrative. I want to know. I like story, and I think a really great poem can achieve both poetry and while it's maybe not called lyric poetry, it still has the intensity, yet at the same time it also gives us a story as well, and to me that's just all the better. It's another level of enjoyment. And the poets I continue to love the most, Seamus Heaney can be both lyrical and narrative, but some of the narrative poems, Les Murray's Freddie Neptune is one of my very favorite poems, and it's actually the ultimate narrative, a poetic novel. So yeah, I think that's also one reason why I've been able to move from poetry, fiction back and forth, is because ultimately there's an element of story always. It is interesting that although I do write narrative poetry, I can never write poetry and fiction at the same time, and I mean to the point where if I'm working on fiction, it takes me sometimes months to get back to where I can retrain my brain or find that frequency that allows me to get back into poetry. And sometimes it's rather scary in the sense that when I've worked really hard on a novel, and when I work on a novel, I tend to not work on anything else, maybe an occasional short story between drafts. But I find myself unable to go back to poetry during that process, and when I finish a novel, there's always a period where, am I going to be able to get back to that place again? And I'm actually at that point right now. And one way I've found to get back to it is to read a lot of poetry by other writers, and that kind of allows me to make that transition back into that form. But it's a completely different experience. I have learned that I cannot depend on moments of inspiration. I think, particularly writing, I think you can do that as a poet, but as a fiction writer, and particularly as a novelist, I tend to think of myself more like a mule, and in the sense that it takes it's almost like a mule that has about 200 or 300 acres to plow. And at least in the American South, we put visors on them, and that's, I think, the way a novelist has to think, that you in a sense are going to be plowing through these fields. For me, usually about 3 years, and it takes discipline, and there are going to be days, sometimes weeks, where the inspiration is not there, or at least seems not to be there. And what I find is that I have to make myself go in. I actually punish myself for not writing. I make myself go in for at least 3 hours, no distractions, no email, nothing like that. And if I have to, I sit there for 3 hours and doing nothing except wishing I could write. But what I find almost inevitably happens is, it may be 10 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes, something starts to stir. And I get back into it. But I think maybe the most underrated aspect of being a successful writer is endurance and discipline. Those are the things that the younger writers don't want to hear about. But a lot of it's just that ability to go in there day in and day out. And I think the fact that I was an athlete when I was younger probably was very helpful in the sense of I learned how to train daily, how to discipline myself, and also how to, sometimes when I was training for a track race, knowing that I would be training a year before I really got to the point where I would be able to actually compete, I started very late as a writer. I have friends who actually one friend, she had already written a novel when she was 8 years old. It wasn't, 400 pages, but she knew even that young that she was going to be a writer. I did not know that. and did not do any kind of writing in high school. When I got into college, I finally got a little bit interested in it, started dabbling a little bit when I was about 20, 21. Continued to do a little bit of that too into my mid-20s. And then I kind of came to a point where I had to decide, are you going to be a dabbler or are you going to commit to this? And I was about 27 years old. And it was a very serious decision for me. And I mean, for me, it really came down to the fact, because I had not been writing that well, and I knew I wasn't writing well, and I had to make this decision. Do you want to really try this and commit yourself to it? And I'm not just talking about for 6 months. I mean, I'm talking about for a lifetime. And risk failing, knowing that you can't do this and putting all this energy and time into it. Or do you want to live your life not knowing if you could do it? And for me, I would rather have failed than not know. And once that happened, once I made that, and actually I felt like to myself I had to make a very symbolic decision. And what I did was, at that time I was actually working on a PhD in English literature. I quit the program, midstream, because I felt like the safe way or safer way would be to go on and, I could probably get a job, more likely get a job at a university or college if I got the PhD. But I also felt like, as much as I value scholarship, that to write takes a very different sensibility than that of a scholar. And so I dropped out of the program, and then I made my move toward committing myself to writing. Perhaps because of my poetry background, but every time I began a new work, my poems, short stories, and novels always began as a single image. For instance, in The Cove, my most recent novel, the image that really started that whole book working was, I had an image of a young woman peering through leaves and looking at this bedraggled young man playing this beautiful silver flute. And that was really all that I knew. I didn't even know that it would be a novel, but that's the way I work. I get an image almost always, and I don't know if that image will lead me into a poem or a short story or novel. And it's been very interesting because twice it's started as a poem, and I finished the poem, and I realized that whatever that image was compelling me to do, I had not fulfilled it. Then I did a short story, and I had the feeling, oh no, it doesn't do it, because the next thing is a novel, and that's the scary moment, because when that happens, I know, okay, 3 years, this is going to be a 3-year project. But it's very interesting because I don't know where it's going to go, and also I've actually had what I thought would be a short story go back into a novel. I mean, into a poem. It goes the other way as well. I was actually talking, Kate Granville and I were talking about this at Adelaide a couple of days ago, that she was talking about how Sarah Thornhill pretty much just announced herself into her life, that she, it was almost like, she might have to say that but this voice just came and demanded to be heard. And Serena began, I was actually driving on a rural road near where I live, 2-lane road, very narrow in the mountains. And a lot of times what I do when I drive is I just turn off the radio and I just kind of daydream as I'm driving. And an image came to me, a very powerful image, and it was an image of a woman on horseback. It was in silhouette. She was on a ridge crest. It was morning. It was dawn. She had blonde hair, and the sun was coming from behind her, and it was burnishing her hair almost like a crown. There was also some fog beneath the ridge, kind of right there. And so it almost as if she were in the clouds, between heaven and earth. And I could tell two things: that she was very sure of herself, rather haughty, very physical. She obviously had command of this horse. And I knew someone was watching her. And whoever it was that was watching her was watching with love, great attentiveness, and also fear. And that image actually comes into the novel about 200 pages in, and it's Pemberton looking at Serena. Yeah, to me, as I get older, the act of writing, the act of, where do the stories come from is more and more mysterious to me. And one of the most haunting things I've ever been told, a woman called me, I don't even know who she was, called me up after my third novel was published, a novel that had many of the scenes set during the American Civil War. And she said, do you know where your stories come from? And I said, well, no, I don't. I mean, I didn't know if it was a real question or if it was rhetorical, but it turned out it was rhetorical. She was going to tell me. And she said, they are the stories the dead want told. And I could almost shiver. I probably did shiver when she told me that, because sometimes it does almost feel like that. There's somebody out there that needs this story to be told, and it's not so much that you are the creator as you're the transmitter. Actually, I love Cormac McCarthy, which probably would not surprise anyone. He's a writer I revere. Annie Proulx is a writer I revere. I am a great admirer of several Australian writers. I feel a real kinship with writers such as Richard Flanagan and Tim Winton, certainly Jeanette Hospital, Kate Grenville. When I read them, I feel that a lot of what I'm trying to do in my work, the importance of landscape, the ability to just tell a compelling story, which I think is an aspect of writing that's very underrated. No matter how good you are technically with language, and to me language is crucial, there is a gift being able to tell a story. And those writers are all great storytellers, as well as doing wonderful things with language. So that's one of the delights of coming to Australia. But, when I read other writers around the world, certainly Marquez, is a writer I've read and felt like I've learned a lot from. And several of the Irish writers I admire. There's a writer who's not always on the radar, a writer named Bernard McLaverty in Ireland, has a wonderful short novel called Cal, which is C-A-L, which is, I just think, wonderfully done. So, I love to read. One of the great regrets about being a novelist, now that I'm, for about 15 years I was a novelist and a short story writer and a poet, but now that I'm a novelist, if I'm writing 6 hours a day, which is what I try to get in, and days when I'm really going, I'll go up to 10, I'm so tired that all I really want to do when I get home is watch a basketball game, and I'm just too tired to read because I spend all that time. But I have found a way out. What I do now is I exercise an hour every day, and I use an elliptical in the gym, and I can have a book in front of me, so I can I usually get in about an hour's writing, and I've been reading a lot of novels that way, just taking a novel in and reading it.